everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. Welcome to our first event in our new series, Get to Know Your Government and Community Leaders. And today we're featuring State Treasurer Daniel Elliott. I want to thank the town hall, the town of Ellettsville, for allowing us to use this wonderful space. I also want to recognize our ambassadors. We have two here today, Lisa Colvin from People's State Bank, who checked you in, and Noelle Conyer, Clerk Treasurer for the town of Ellettsville. I want to recognize our board members that are here today. We have Clark Greiner from the BEDC, Donna Neese from the Neese Agency, and Tice Carmichael from Weddle Brothers Construction. And Tice will lead the candid conversation with Treasurer Elliott today. We want to thank our premium partners who support the chamber at the highest level. It's AccuSure, the May Agency, Alternative Care Solutions, Cassidy Electrical Contractors, Chandler Funeral Homes, Cook Medical, Dan Rary Real Estate, Duke Energy, Hoosier Country B97, Hoosier Energy, Hoosier Hills Credit Union, Indiana Members Credit Union, IU Credit Union, IU Health Bloomington Hospital, McDonald's Ellettsville, Monroe County YMCA, Old National Bank, Owen County State Bank, People's State Bank, Richard Small Engine Incorporated, Smithville, Visit Bloomington, and Weddle Brothers Construction. Please mark your calendars for our legislative panel on March 7th and our Coffee Connection sponsored by Smithville on March 25th. For more details on registration and sponsorship, please visit our website. And I want to welcome Nicole Plunkett to the podium at this time to introduce our speaker.
Hello, everyone. I am Nicole Plunkett, Vice President of Commercial Sales with Smithville, and we're privileged to introduce our Indiana State Treasurer, Daniel Elliott, today. Daniel Elliott was elected as the 56th Indiana State Treasurer on November 8th of 2022. In this role, Treasurer Elliott serves as the chair of the Indiana Bond Bank, the statewide E911 Board, the Indiana Education Savings Authority, the ABLE Authority, the sole trustee of the State Police Pension Trust, among several other positions. As the state's chief investment officer, he oversees the management of over $16 billion on a daily basis. Prior to becoming treasurer, Daniel Elliott worked his entire 25-year professional career in information technology, first as a software engineer and then as a software architect. As an entrepreneur at heart, Treasurer Elliott started his own software consulting company focusing on software application, development, and cybersecurity. He has also served in local government as a member of the Morgan County Council and president of the Morgan County Redevelopment Commission. This experience gives Treasurer Elliott unique insight into the challenges local government officials face every day. Daniel Elliott grew up in the unincorporated town of Nebraska in rural Jennings County. Today, he lives on a small farm in rural Morgan County with his wife, Laura, and their 4 children. He is a proud school choice dad and an advocate for traditional Hoosier values. Treasurer Elliott graduated from Utah Valley University and is the first Latter-day Saint to be elected to statewide office in the state of Indiana. Treasurer Elliott loves to spend time with his family and outdoors. One of his passions is training his own horses, and he and his children can often be found outside riding their horses on a beautiful Indiana afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me in welcoming Indiana State Treasurer Daniel Elliott.
Turned on, right? Can everyone hear now? In, out, I can just yell and talk a little louder too.
So I have a big mouth. I have 4 kids.
That'll work. That'll work.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll start off with the easy one and just tell us a little bit about your day-to-day life as the treasurer of the state.
Well, day to day, as was mentioned, I'm the chief investment officer for the state of Indiana. So I have a very unique position compared to other statewide office holders. My main job is to make money for the state of Indiana. And I think that's actually makes it very enjoyable because usually, you know, you go, if you're an elected office holder, you'll go to a town council, a county council, or the legislature, and you want to ask for money. I'm the one guy who gets to show up and say, here's money. To illustrate this, I had to do the same thing. I had to present my budget to our General Assembly here recently. And I was able to present to them that in the first fiscal year that I was treasurer of the state of Indiana, we were able to raise $541 million. So that's over $500 million. This year, we are set to raise $575 million. That's another over $500 million. So over $1 billion in a biennium. That's how they measure their budgets. To give you perspective, the previous decade before that combined, all years combined, was only $636 million. So we have taken advantage of the markets. We've been given the right tools to be able to make sure that we can do so. And that's made it that's good for the state of Indiana. It's good for you because every dollar that I raise through investments is a dollar that we don't have to tax the people in Indiana. So that is the main job, but the General Assembly's also seen fit to put the treasurer of the state on 18 different boards. So yes, I go to a lot of meetings. And a lot of those are fiscal, not all of them. I chair quite a few of these boards, and I also run what are called quasi-governmental agencies. So these are agencies, why they're called quasi-governmental, while they are run by government officials like myself, their budgets are completely outside. They're not using taxpayer dollars to run their budgets, so they are able to function completely independently. One of those is the Indiana Bond Bank. In fact, Ellettsville has used the Indiana Bond Bank. The Indiana Bond Bank is exactly what it sounds like, simply a bank, but it's specifically designed to use for bonding purposes. In other words, government loans to be able to build infrastructure. The bond bank is a very unique tool that is specifically designed to help. You have some communities, say Carmel, Indiana. We've all heard of Carmel. It's a beautiful place, right? I don't want to live there, but it's a beautiful place. And they're very wealthy, unlike a lot of our regular communities, like Ellettsville, like Martinsville, where I live. And so they can pretty much do whatever they want because they have tons of funding. Unfortunately, the rest of us have to live in the real world, and we don't have that option. And so sometimes, especially for smaller communities, because they don't bond as often, they don't have the same kind of credit rating as, say, a Carmel or a Fishers does. So what they do is they come to us as the bond bank. The bond bank uses the credit rating of the state of Indiana and allows these communities to be able to focus more of that money, because you only have so much money, focus more of that money on the actual project versus having to pay high interest rates. And it's worked out really well. We have over $221 million worth of projects that are scattered throughout the state of Indiana, here in Ellettsville, along the Ohio River, northern Indiana. We've done everything from culverts, just those pipes on the ground, to courthouse renovations, to buildings, to jails, to power generation. A lot of it is basic infrastructure. The neat thing for me, though, is this is, as a state, I have the option, and what I'm doing is investing in our local communities. As was said in my bio, I come from just up the road, a little place called Green Township, just east of Martinsville. I grew up in Nebraska, Indiana, which is a small, unincorporated town, which I think on a Sunday when both churches are full is about 150 people. So I am rural Indiana through and through. The cowboy boots are not for sure. I have this great opportunity to help rural Indiana, help communities throughout Indiana, invest in them and help them grow. So I love my job.
So with that, what are some of the services or tools your office offers to local governments and Indiana business? Obviously, you said 18 commissions, many of the things you just mentioned. What specific services can we connect back?
Excellent question. So there's a lot of things that we do. I'll start with local governments first because those tend to be out in the front. A lot of people see that. So we, as I mentioned, Indiana Bond Bank, we're building things. I like to build things. When I was in county government, I was known for a guy who wanted to build things. I'm a software engineer by trade. I'm a nerd, but I learned so much about sewer plants, water lines, all these things that are the basic infrastructure that helps a community grow. You can't put a subdivision over here if there's not water lines, if there's not power. To the folks in Smithville, one of my first things that I want when I got involved in local government, I came from, to live in a rural area. I didn't have broadband, and I had this passion for wanting to put broadband in as many parts of rural Morgan County as I could. When I became treasurer, when I started in local government, about 25% of Morgan County had broadband. By the time I became state treasurer, less than 10 years later, 85% of Morgan County had broadband. That's the kind of work that really makes a difference, because if your children, once they graduate school, you want them to find a community to live in and to be able to settle down in. And let's be honest, moms and dads, you want that to be fairly close to you, right? And so those things are building that community. That's the heart of it. As I mentioned, I live right up the road, about 30 minutes up the road, but my son lives here in Ellettsville, so that's working. He met a girl from Ellettsville. They settled down here, and now, of course, he wants to get out in the country and get bigger land. What young man doesn't? But they just got married this October. But that's the goal: building our communities. And you want our children to say, "Look, I want to settle down here." Some of the other programs that I offer is a program called Trust Indiana. So, as I mentioned earlier, I've raised $1 billion for the state of Indiana in the last 2 years. This is a great tool, but our local clerk treasurers and county treasurers don't have the same options of investing as the state of Indiana does. Trust Indiana allows them to do that. And why this is important is very simply this. The same thing that I just told you about me as state treasurer. If Noel can raise more money through investing, then that's less money we have to tax people. It's really that simple. It's nothing more complicated than that. But at the same time, I'm also the state's banker. And so you're like, well, how do I, help local banks? Because we don't want to hurt local banks. One of the things most people aren't aware of, a lot of bankers aren't even aware of this. I have $16 billion that I need to move around. And just like any good financial planner, you want to have a diversified portfolio. Well, imagine if, there's a lot of big banks. Chase wants my $16 billion. They want to say, we'll hold it for you. Why do they want to hold that $16 billion? That interest. They're going to invest it. They're going to invest it, and that's fine. I have no problem with that because I need someone to hold that for me. But I would much rather invest it in our local banks. Because let's be honest. Look, my personal bank is Home Bank in Martinsville. Lisa Arnold is a dear friend. I've known her for years. I can call up Home Bank or any other bank president in the state of Indiana if I'm holding money in there. Do you think Jamie Dimon is going to return my phone call? No. So it's better for the state of Indiana. And I understand how important our local community banks are, because our local community banks invest in local small businesses, invest in you. And so I'd rather say, okay, how much do you need? You need 15 million, for liquidity purposes? Great, here you go. Here's 15 million. It's really not that difficult. And that's what's great about, again, I tell everyone, the treasurer's office is the most underrated office in the State House. I'm an elected official. Most people hear money, and I'm a nerd, so I'm used to this. The minute I start talking about what I do every day, people's eyes glaze over. They're like, when will we stop? And that's okay, because what we do is fairly complicated. But it's also very important. And what this office does is we get to touch on so many different aspects of people's lives in the state of Indiana, and most people don't even realize it.
That's awesome. So some people will talk about Indiana's strong credit rating. How does the state's credit rating impact state and local government or businesses, specific to a smaller community like Ellettsville? What does that mean that the state has a good credit rating to us?
So we have a AAA credit rating, best you can get. And what that means is very simply, we're able to negotiate lower interest rates. And what that means is, think about this. So let's say it's Ellettsville and you're building a new utility building back here. Well, that building is going to cost X amount of dollars, period, end of story. It's not really that negotiable. We like to negotiate a little here and there, but really what you're saying is, I'm going to not have this, and that's what's going to bring down the price. But the cost is the cost. So let's just say, I'm just going to make up a number so don't get mad at me. Let's say it was $10 million is what it was going to cost. But by the time you pay interest rate, it's going to cost $12 million. Well, that's how much that project costs the city of the town of Ellettsville. That's how much they have budgeted. Well, how much better if you can get it for the building cost is $11 million. You still only have that $12 million, but now you're only paying $1 million in interest rates. That's the difference between having a good credit rating. Now, some communities aren't doing this every day, so they don't have a established credit rating. Think of about like, my daughter in college. She didn't have bad credit, but she didn't have good credit either. She has very little credit. That's just because she's in college. She's not really bought a lot of things. So that's the same thing with our communities. Now, a community like Bloomington, they're doing projects all the time. And so they are able to establish that credit. So they may not need to come to the Indiana Bond Bank. They might be able to just go on the open market and get a better credit rating. Great. Or maybe they can't. Maybe, and I'm not picking on Bloomington, I'll just use this in just using Bloomington because they're there. Maybe that in the past, previous leadership didn't really do some things wisely. So maybe their credit rating is a little less than. That's okay. By coming to the Indiana Bond Bank, doesn't matter. Because Indiana has excellent credit. Other states, Illinois wants to be Indiana. They really do.
Yeah.
So with that being the case, we have low taxes, we have a pro-business environment, we have all these tools that help our businesses grow. Other states don't have that, but Indiana does. And we can actually share that with our communities throughout the state. And that's good for Ellettsville, that's good for Posey County, that's good for large communities, big communities. Because when you guys are growing, we're not independent. The state is not its own thing. We're a family. And when one member of that family does well, everyone does well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for your part in keeping that credit rating high, because I've seen it not only in this community, but other communities that we work in. It really is a nice environment to be able to go get funds at a good rate and move forward. With change in administration, everything else happening, how much do you interact with the legislature, and what can you tell us about how changes or potential changes in property tax structure might affect the work in your office?
So that's a good question. So I interact with all the elected officials on a daily basis. Governor Braun, I will say this, Governor Braun's our new governor, and he literally had only been, we had the inauguration on Monday, sorry. We had the inauguration on Monday. Monday afternoon, he's calling my office wanting to meet with me the next day. And when we got, and so I of course did, and we sat down and oftentimes you go and talk to politicians and they're kind of like fluffy and then they don't want to get into details and the staff gets into the details. Oh no, not Governor Braun. Right off the bat, Governor Braun was like, all right, I want to talk about how much we have, how well we're doing. He wanted to know details. In fact, the staff didn't even know what we were talking about. It was him and I. And I should expect this. He's a guy who made a multi-million-dollar business. He knows numbers. So we had a great time. And then a week later, we had another meeting. I've had 4 meetings with Governor Braun, and he's been governor less than a month. So I look at this, and I'm very encouraged. He's excited. He's working hard, trying to get things done. That's on the governor's side. Also, I work very closely with Elise Nishala, our comptroller. We literally every day, we have to reconcile books. I'm in charge of all the money. She's in charge of writing the checks and paying off bills. And that's designed that way by our Constitution. We have to reconcile every single day. But with that, to the point of the General Assembly, I am legitimately the most active treasurer that we've ever had working with our General Assembly. I literally meet with them every day during the session. There are so many different bills. I mean, it's finance. For instance, there's questions about Bitcoin, the ability to invest in Bitcoin. That's a bill going through. So I've had, while they were in hearing for that, I get a text from a older gentleman. I was actually impressed that he sent me a text. An older legislator, and he wanted my opinion because he was there and they were debating it right then and there. He wanted my opinion on Bitcoin. My opinion to him was, yes, if you feel like that's a need, I have no problem. We can do that, but don't expect me to do it. I will look at what's in the best interest of the state, and if there's opportunities, great. I explained to him, Bitcoin has a lot of opportunities for good returns, but it could always, if we ever were to do it, whether it be in our pension funds or what have you, it should be a very, very small part of our portfolio. While it can help give some good returns, it has so much volatility that you have to be willing to also lose some of those returns, and we don't want to do that with people's pension funds.
Appreciate your candidness on the risk tolerance right there.
That's the good thing about having this really good relationship with the General Assembly. I mentioned Trust Indiana. Trust Indiana has some great opportunities, but it has some limitations right now. And we're looking at removing those limitations. Indiana is the only state that has those limitations. And if we do that, that allows people like Noel to raise even more revenue for our state without having to raise taxes. That's a win-win for everybody.
And it can kind of lead into my next question. So part of your bio and history is you've got some experience in more local government, smaller community government, so you understand those challenges. What's your biggest piece of advice for local governments for continuing to provide services in a time that can somewhat have diminishing funding options? So obviously, smaller communities or anybody else having more levers to pull, arms, and ways to get funds eases that burden a little bit, but that change doesn't happen quickly.
It doesn't. It doesn't.
In our current climate,
the first thing I will say is, and I had to do this as a local elected official, learn what levers you have. You'd be surprised how many people aren't aware of the levers that are out there for them. You have your lit, you have all sorts of options. How can I use them? I remember at one particular point when I was in county government, I was reading through the statute and it was like, wait a minute, I can use this particular bucket of funds to help pay for a sewer plant, the operations of a sewer plant, because we had the funds to build it, but we didn't know how we were going to operate it. And it was like, well, wait a minute, I'm seeing it right here in statute. And then I took it to our attorney, because our attorney didn't know either. No one knows everything. And he was like, oh, yeah. And we started checking around. I was like, well, there you go. We had the funds. We just didn't know we had the funds. So learn the levers first. So that's the first thing. Then second, don't be afraid to change. I hated when I was in government, local government, when I would come in and people would say, well, we've always done it that way. That is again, I'm a software engineer by trade. That is the worst thing you could tell me, because that does not help you solve the problem. Look at new opportunities. Broadband. Okay, right now we all think it's obvious. Well, yeah, everybody should have broadband. 10 years ago, I was talking about how if we want to attract young people to our communities, their homes have to have broadband because they need that for their jobs. And I remember good friends, lovely people, older gentleman, Norm Boyles, county commissioner, farmer, 4th generation farmer, great guy. But he was like, no one cares about broadband. They're just gonna watch Netflix. It's like, no. Their entire job's built around this. And he just didn't understand. So don't be afraid to push back and look and have these conversations. I'll say this, it's just the truth. And it's not pleasant. We were talking about this in Monrovia. Monrovia, community where I live, or not, in a community in my county where I live, it is about to get a data center. And there's a lot of folks who told me, I don't want a data center because I like living on a farm and I want this to stay exactly the way it is. Nothing stays exactly the way it is. It either grows or it shrinks. There are more communities shrinking in this state than there are those that are growing. Now, I live in the country. I literally got dust from Bybee Stonehouse on my boots right now. I love tradition too, but you have to recognize if you want to grow, if we're going to attract people like my son to your communities, which you guys have done, you've got to give them tools and options, because someday they'll be the ones on the town council. And we want to make sure we leave it better than we found it.
All right, you guys got that clipped, right? We can use that and just put it out there. Everybody got that? All right, thank you for that. So I'll ask you to go a little bit further and kind of flip it back to the audience, right? You've been an entrepreneur before. You started your own software company. You are a business here in Ellettsville. You're a People's State Bank. You're a Smithville. You're a Kuntz Roofing. You are some of the people I'm seeing sitting out there. What is your biggest piece of advice, or what would you do to be successful right now? What steps would you take, or how would you go about that?
It's going to be kind of a weird way to say this, but because I'm telling you to do one thing that actually leads to something else, and that is have a plan. Have a plan of attack for your business. So that's common sense, right? But then be open for the changes. Be able to pivot. Because as much as you plan, what will come down the pike will completely surprise you. And you will have no way to plan for it. But because you planned for other things, you'll find it puts you in a position to be able to pivot. Because as an entrepreneur, we have to pivot. You suddenly have one base of client, and suddenly that changes. And there's a whole other base of clients. I remember building software, and then suddenly you could buy that out of the box. I was building it custom. And suddenly, somebody built a tool and Microsoft bought it, and suddenly everybody was doing it. That's okay. We pivoted. We learned, okay, well then we're going to learn how to customize that tool. That's business. That's being an entrepreneur. Look for us entrepreneurs, we work late, we get up early, we're constant. We are a little bit of everything. But that's also what gives us that ability to pivot, because we always are looking for that new opportunity.
So we've talked about a lot. You've shared a lot of good information here. Sitting on several boards and commissions, and we've talked about different funding sources that people don't necessarily know are there, the different levers you can pull. We know we're not unique in the state of wanting to expand, wanting more money, anything else. What advice do you have for businesses, but the community as a whole, to stand out to someone in your position as we're going after limited funds? I mean, it sounds like a big pot of money, and it is. There is funding options out there, but there's only so much. There's more opportunity than there are
Right.
funds to fund those opportunities. How do we stand out as a community and get, quite frankly, a larger slice of the pie,
Yeah.
if you will, right?
So actually, I was talking to some folks here in your chamber, and they were talking about what was it called? Envision Ellettsville? Is that what it's
Yes.
called? All right. And I thought it was really awesome because here was this combination of private, local, and nonprofit all working together. That people at the state, we look at that and say, okay, these guys have their act together. Believe me, not everybody does. You'll go into communities and so-and-so is fighting with so-and-so, and they think you're supposed to understand why, even though it went back generations. But the reality is, when you work together as community, as business owners, everyone in the same vision, it's amazing when the state will say, well, these guys know what they're doing. Okay, we can help. I will give you an example from when I was in local government. So we all remember I-69. Remember when that was first going through Monroe County? And it happened here first. And let's be honest, if you paid any attention to the news, and if you paid any attention to the government officials, frankly, some of the local county government officials were pushing back against it. We don't like it. We don't want it. No, it's awful. While it was being built. It's like, it's already been decided, folks. And so, think about that while they're talking to NDOT. Well, we really don't want that interchange. Really? Why? Now, I'm going to fast forward to Morgan County when it was our turn. And I'm not saying we're perfect in Morgan County. We were not. But I was president of the Redevelopment Commission at the time. So obviously very involved. I had this idea and me and fellow people on the fellow members of our commission, we wanted to put a sewer plant in the poorest part of Morgan County, a place called Waverly. And everybody thought that was dumb. Like, what are you doing that for? Like, well, for one, we have a lot of homes that are right along the White River. And when there's floods, because there are always floods along the White River, those septic systems fail. And it's a mess in more ways than one. Economically to the homeowners, to the city, or to the, not the city, to the county, to everybody. We also have a elementary school that was the elementary school specifically because it was designed for children with disabilities. It was on a failing mound system. But people fought, oh my goodness, they were like, we don't want it because you're gonna force us to sign up. We're like, no, we're not gonna force anybody to sign up. We went ahead and built it. We had this idea that when I-69 came through, they would put an interchange there. And we were right. And when they put their interchange there, they saw, in fact, we didn't know where they were going to put it. They were like, well, they're going to go through Mooresville, they're going to go up here. We're like, you don't know if they're going to do that. We planned as if I-69 was going to come straight up 37, because it just seemed logical, but also because it would be for the betterment of our communities if we did it that way. When we did that, NDOT was like, oh, okay, you guys, you're all working together. All the council, the commission, redevelopment commission, the county commissioners, everybody's working together. Okay, we like this plan. We can do this. Now, we wanted more interchanges. You always want more. But it was so much smoother because we had a plan and we were willing to work together. And going back to my point, when we needed to pivot, because they said, look, you can't have interchanges, all these interchanges, so which ones do you want the most? We were able to pivot to, okay, these are where it's most important. So that to me is how you show, we're all people. I know a lot of people like to make fun of politicians, and I guess technically I am one, and say, well, they don't care. I've found the exact opposite as I've traveled the state. Governor Braun cares. I care. Your state senators and state reps care. Doesn't matter what party they're from, they care. Your local elected officials care. Let's be honest. No one puts up with this much unless they really truly care about their communities or their state. So finding ways to work together, when you're working well together, then the state comes in and says, oh, that's a well-oiled machine. All right, we can work with it. and you get more money.
Great, good answer. One thing I had to cover, we talked a little bit in the back, was most surprising to me is that one of your duties as treasurer is 911 services.
Yes.
How does that fit? What's the story there?
There you go. So I am the chairman of the state 911 board, and I am literally the only treasurer in the United States who runs 911. And a lot of you are probably wondering the same thing that a lot of people have asked me. Why does the treasurer run 911? Well, what a lot of people don't realize is that the primary purpose of the statewide 911 system is to distribute the funds to your local units of government so that they can run their individual 911 centers. That's my primary purpose there. So if you're managing money and trying to distribute to folks, who's the best one to do that? Your treasurer. Now, on the other side of that, though, there's also the state 911 network. So you have these each individual hubs, 911 centers, but there's still a big network that connects them all together. And it has to be that way because if you remember, from 9/11 back in 2001, remember how you couldn't even get on a cell phone at the time? How bad it was? We've had to create here in Indiana our own independent system. That way, if there's ever an emergency, when there's a tornado, if you're calling mom and dad to check on them, which you should be able to, that network is separate from what emergency services are using. We developed that, and Indiana is literally, no exaggeration, this is not just because I'm in charge, Indiana is top of class. Other states want to be Indiana when it comes to 911. For instance, we have text to 911 in every county. Even here in Ellettsville, you can text 911. Even in Jennings County, where my parents live, very rural, they can text 911. Now, think about our college students right down the road. That's faster for them than calling. But that's every county in the state. Most states don't have that. We have translation services. Again, let's use the university here. You have a lot of international students. And if they are in a car accident, they're probably struggling to remember to speak English because they're panicked. Our system can literally cycle through and figure out what language they're speaking and get them to somebody who speaks their language, and it takes seconds. It is so amazing, our system, that this true story, this happened last year. Ohio doesn't have this. Illinois definitely doesn't have this. In Ohio, there was a car accident, and they were fairly close to the Indiana border. The person couldn't speak because of the car accident, so they texted 911. Where they were at, there was no text to 911 system, but it bounced off the cell tower, went to Indiana, and our Indiana 911 operators were able to save the life of somebody in Ohio. That's how cool our program is. But I'll bring up something else that we're doing, because it isn't just about technology, though I'm a nerd. It's oftentimes is about technology. But one of the things we're doing right now, we've been supporting this bill. I talked about working with legislators. There is something called the Lifeline Law. You may have heard that. You're close to a college town, so if you've heard about that, that's where I say child, I call them child, they're adults, but I still call my kids child. If a young person who shouldn't be legally drinking is drinking and gets, drinks so much that they're now in trouble, their friends can call 911 without getting in trouble. Now that law is fairly new, but it exists. But there's a hole in that law. The kid who was drinking can get in trouble. No one thought about it at the time. And so what we've seen is there are some young people who are, well, I don't want to get Jimmy in trouble because he drank too much. He'll get out of this. We're trying to change that law. It's passed through the Senate unanimously without any problem. It'll flip over to the House here soon. That says, okay, Jimmy's not going to get in trouble either. We need to make sure he gets some help, both immediate emergency help and some help maybe through the school, maybe through other tools. But the key thing here is Jimmy doesn't die. And that's the most important thing. And so, yes, I get to work on really cool things that sometimes you wouldn't even think are part of managing money.
That's great. So I really appreciate the conversation, and your passion has shown through. You can tell you're really excited about a lot of the things that you get to do. What did we miss? What is something you want to make sure you got to speak about today, or you want to tell us that we didn't get to?
There's a lot of agencies that I run. One of them that I probably would like to talk about here is I have been asked as treasurer to run 2 of the state's new school choice programs. ESA is Educational Scholarship Accounts, designed for children with disabilities so that mom and dad can actually manage the flow of funds versus having a school do it and determine what's best for my child. And that's a really cool program because it's literally built around mom and dad being in the driver's seat, mom and dad deciding what's best for their child's education. But the newest one is called Career Scholarship Accounts. It's an apprenticeship program. Not every child wants to go be a software engineer, go to college and be a software engineer. That's okay. Not everyone wants to be a lawyer or an accountant. Some really want to go into the trades. My son is one of those. Got great grades in school, but he's been a gearhead from the moment he knew what a screwdriver was. And his senior year, he came to me and said, Dad, I want to be a mechanic. I found an apprenticeship program I want to go into. And this was a private apprenticeship program. CSA didn't exist at the time. He did that, loved it, was working. As I told you, he bought a house here in Ellettsville, bought a house at 21. How often do kids get to buy a house at 21? Bought a house at 21. Now he told me, Dad, I just don't want to pay rent. I want to get my buddies to pay me rent. And I'm thinking, oh, an entrepreneurial son, I'm all proud of him. 3 months later, he proposed to his girlfriend. He had another plan in place. But they got married about a year later, which was October, so everything's great. But while he found an apprenticeship program, it's hard sometimes to match up these kids with these programs. What CSA does is allows us as a state, we pay for these kids to go into apprenticeship programs their junior and senior year of high school. A local business will bring them on as an apprentice, will help pay for equipment, training, things like that, so that these kids, while they're in high school, are in an apprenticeship program. So you think about 2 years in an apprenticeship program while you're in high school, and then when you graduate high school, boom, you are working in the workforce doing what you want to do. And my son's a good example of it, so are so many other young men and young women. There are some really good careers in trades. And those are the things that I get to do every day.
So, selfish question, because I have the microphone. Does that program apply to the unions in trades?
Absolutely. Yeah. We'd love to see what's great about this is we could work with different unions and try to get them working on these programs. I want to see it's a brand new program. It's only a year old, so a lot don't even know about it. But what I want to see is this happening all over rural Indiana, especially rural Indiana. There's a huge need, and oftentimes what happens in rural communities, I say this because this happened to me. I was one of those kids. Grew up in Jennings County, went to college, didn't go back. But these kind of programs, if we can get them moving in rural communities, then that can help our rural communities grow. That and getting folks like Smithville to put broadband in as many places as possible.
Great. I believe we have time baked in for question and answer. Is that correct? So we're going to go ahead and transition to that period.
Perfect.
Do you want me to pass around the mic, or?
I think, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine.
I think it's probably not necessary.
I'll try to reiterate if we don't hear. So.
Yes.
Daniel, thank you for joining us today. 911 dispatch workers, we seem to have a shortage of those. I don't know if it's just our community, probably not even our state, it's probably a national issue. how do we staff such an important first responder position and make that an attractable field that we can have some stability there?
And you are absolutely right. One of the things when I was in county council, because of my technology background, I was very focused on 911 as well. And I'm very familiar with it's hard to find people who will take those jobs, and work those jobs, because it takes a very special person to be a 911 dispatcher. Because you have to be calm when people are at their most scared moment in life. And sometimes you have to be there, deal with it, help them. Then when that other first responder shows up, the police officer, the fireman, or the ambulance, you don't know what happens. That's stressful. So there's two things that we're trying to do. One is help use some of our funds to do training throughout the state so that we can get people trained up to the level they need to be without it having to cost the local communities. Because that way they can put more of those funding, more of their funds to pay for the pay of our dispatchers. But it's all ultimately a local county council oftentimes, and sometimes city council, most often county council, question. Because we have to, honestly, if they can go to Walmart and be a lot less stressed and get paid as much, that's not a good thing. So we really need to get our communities to understand, yes, you need to invest in paying. These are first responders. These are not, a lot of times people think, well, there's somebody using a phone. That is not what's going on here. I mean, it's very technical. And if you've ever been into a 911 center, it's like walking on the Starship Enterprise. There's a lot of great technology there, but that also means we need to get people skilled up and trained. So it's a hard dichotomy because the decision is made by the local community leaders on how much they're going to pay them. What we try to do on our part is just expand the training and the tools and pay for as much as we can up front so that the local communities have more money on their end.
You mentioned businesses, counties, cities, townships utilizing the state's credit score in order to go about their own interests. What happens to their own credit score when that utilization is happening?
So the good thing is that, what they're looking at when they're looking at bonding, they're just looking at how much you do. And oftentimes that will, and how often, and if you have a good history of paying it back, just like you using a credit card. So with that being the case, that helps improve that credit rating. If you end up, say you're a fast growing community, maybe you were smaller in the beginning, they're saying, okay, they're paying back their bonds. They have a good history of doing this. They have some sophistication about them and they understand that. And not everybody who uses us actually has a bad credit score. Some people just use us because we're fast. I mean, it takes 6 weeks from the moment you send in that application to the moment it gets approved in our process. And I've had people like Zionsville, which is a very fast growing community, use our system because it was just faster. But it does help. But it's all part of just building up that reputation. Yes.
Thank you for your time. One of my questions is, you mentioned Envision Ellettsville. The community got together across nonprofits, profits, and the designated bodies here. One of the things that we're trying to do, part of that plan talks about the west side of Ellettsville and the growth that we're really starting to see out there. We've got some wonderful housing divisions coming in out there. We have a lot of land that's starting to be annexed into the community. And one of the things that we've got a lot of cooperation locally here, but when we start pulling in other state agencies to start having that conversation, don't want to name names or anything like that, but I'll give you their initials. It's NDOT. And we're going along that road on the west side. We've got a lot of growth. And so how do you get those folks to really engage on some of the traffic challenges we're going to be experiencing in the very near future on that, with housing, and then some of the economic development opportunities that we have out there? Is there anything you can do with some of your bonds and leveraging that?
So the bonds would not be what would help you with that. There's two things that will help you with that. One is data. You gotta provide data. It can be, we think this is gonna happen. You gotta show why this is going to happen. So first show data, because you just gotta show your work. It's hard, I know, but you got to. But the second is relationships. That's where your state reps and state senators come in the most useful. They need to be the type, not every state rep and state senator is a go-getter, but they need to be the kind that will push and not take no for an answer. Let's be honest. I always assume, and I did this when I was an entrepreneur, and I do this as a state treasurer. I assume every time I go in to ask for a bill to happen, that it's going to be no. Because that's usually, and I've actually heard people tell me this, they will say no first because they just want us, because they're like, well, if I say no, they'll stop bothering me. Now, once you start bothering them, they're like, oh, they're serious. So you do have to be an advocate and you have to push. When I was building the wastewater treatment facility, sewer plant, when we first went in for some funding, it was like, no, you guys know that you don't really need that there. It's too small. Like, no, it's going to grow. And we pushed and pushed and pushed. So that is, and I wish there were an easier answer, but it's just like any business. If you want to succeed at something, you have to keep pushing until it is so embedded in their mind what you have told them 50 times over that they don't even bother checking anymore. They just realize, well, Ellettsville's growing, we better do something. And that's also where you need good, dynamic local leaders who are willing to be pushy. I've seen your clerk treasurer at the State House multiple times. That's a good thing. Your town council members and others as well. William Ellis, I've seen him probably as much as I've seen Noel up there. That's good because you gotta push. Yes?
Hi, I'm a local financial advisor, so I love the Indiana 529 plan, the state tax credit. This is very tactical, but I've noticed in the last few months that the hold times and the amount of time it takes to get in touch with somebody, because we're doing disbursements and things, has gotten extended. I think our record's 2.5 hours on hold, or
Really?
long callbacks. But probably 4 months ago, we're getting through immediately. Is it a known issue, or is there a staffing shortage?
There shouldn't be a staffing issue, but actually, Randy, if you'll get her Marissa's, I will put you in direct touch with my executive director. And because we contract out with companies to do these things, some of these things like when you make a phone call, and if they're not doing it well, I need to know it. So you're helping me by giving me this feedback, and I can tell you, Marissa is a pit bull. She will like, look, I've gotten this phone call, and this phone call, and this phone call, and she will be on it.
It's always been great to deal with them, it's just the last few months I noticed that, so.
That's good.
Thanks.
That's good to know. Thank you. And see, this is part of why I like doing this, because I hear, if you're not aware, I also remember 18 different boards. I chair the Indiana 529 program, and that is the program that people will use to save money for their children's future education, whether that be college or trade. And it's a really good program, but nothing's perfect. And when I hear things like that, then now I can promise you the next time Marissa and I have our meeting, which will be in a week or so, I'm going to ask her about this conversation. And that's good for me, because as an elected official, if you guys don't tell me stuff, then I just don't know. And that's part of the reason why myself and Taylor and Randy we drive all over the state. We put 55,000 miles on the pickup truck in the last 18 months, because that's how you find out what's going on. You had a question?
So you talked about being on 18 boards. Does Department of Revenue report to you?
No, Department of Revenue reports to the governor.
Okay. So you've talked about Indiana Bond Bank, Indiana Finance Authority.
That's one of them, yes.
Okay. Indiana Housing and Community Development.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I am vice chair of both of those two boards that were just mentioned. The Indiana Finance Authority is, Indiana's Constitution does not allow the state of Indiana to go into debt. So the way they got around that many, many, many years ago is they created the Indiana Finance Authority. The Indiana Finance Authority was actually created under Mitch Daniels, and it combined a lot of these groups and agencies that did have debt. And it manages very, very large projects. and does very much what I do with the bonding, but on a bigger scale for much larger infrastructure projects like the double track, which is a big rail project out in northeastern Indiana. So we're talking billion-dollar projects. Still the same principle though. And then the Indiana Housing and Community Development Authority, that is for affordable housing throughout the state. One of the things, I'm also vice chair of that committee, of that board, and one of the things that we try to focus on there is building out housing, especially affordable housing. And one of the things to point out, a lot of people assume affordable housing units are being built in big cities. And yeah, it's true, that's true. But we also put a lot of emphasis on our rural communities. You, again, come from rural Indiana, and no offense to Indianapolis, I don't mind working there, but I do not want to ever live there. Any other questions? Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you very much for joining us. Jill, is there anything else you want to say, or just adjourn?
I'd like to thank everyone for coming today. I really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you again.